Hello, welcome to the launch of Africa's Eden by Cheryl Adam. Before we begin, I'd just like to respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship over the lands and waterways. The lands on which Spinifex offices are situated are Jiru, Bunurong and Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Aora and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their own lives. So once again, welcome to you all. I'm going to say just a few words about both Cheryl and Andrea, who are the main performers this evening. Cheryl, some of Cheryl Adam's life will be introduced to you during this launch. She's been a bit of a rebel. She's been evicted, kidnapped, abandoned, made homeless and deported. But she's also a really fabulous organiser, as she showed when in 2013 she worked with homeless women in Manila on an arts project which she set up and ran. In 2017, Cheryl sent us the manuscript of Lillian's Eden, asking where we thought she should send it. We read it and loved it, and so it didn't go any further. So then came Out of Eden in 2021, and now Africa's Eden is hitting the shelves. So now you can buy all three with a special discount, which we'll give you more information about later. If you are not muted, could you mute yourself, please? Andrea Goldsmith and I met sometime in the late 1980s. A particular memory I have is of sitting in the cafe next to the Athenaeum Theatre, where the Melbourne Writers' Festival was being held in 1986. It was called Spoleto back then. Among the guests were Margaret Atwood and A.S. Byatt and several very unprepared male writers whose names I cannot remember. These days, with 8 novels and shortlistings for prizes like the Miles Franklin for The Prosperous Thief and Lisbeth Cohen Award for her second novel, Modern Interiors, Andrea is now frequently a guest of writers' festivals. She is a great storyteller, as is Cheryl Adam. So over to you, Andrea.
Thanks, Sue. Thank you. Actually, my memory is of an alternative Melbourne Cup party in mainstream Northcote, but that's another story. Hello, everyone. We are gathered here today to celebrate the publication of Cheryl Adam's fine new novel, Africa's Eden, and I'm very, very pleased to be doing the honours here. As Sue mentioned, Africa's Eden is the third of a trilogy, which began with Lillian's Eden and was followed by Out of Eden. It was in Out of Eden that Maureen McKinley emerged as a main character, and she cements her place as the central character in this, the third novel. Africa's Eden will be the last of the Maureen McKinley novels. I'm assured that the trilogy is not going to be a quartet, but maybe Cheryl has got some other ideas. I don't know. The books can readily stand alone, but if you're after the full banquet, I would purchase all three. Africa's Eden opens with 24-year-old Australian Maureen McKinley, unmarried mother of Henry Bernard, living with her Aunt Audrey in London. From the outset, we know we are dealing with a very strong woman. This is the 1960s. She's chosen to keep her baby. Very, very few women were able to do that, to come to that decision. As well, Aunt Audrey wants to adopt Henry Bernard, but Maureen won't have a bar of it. And with an offer from Pete, an old boyfriend, to join him in South Africa, absolutely no strings attached, of course, she leaves her aunt, The woman has been her primary support since the birth of her son. The rest of the novel takes place against the backdrop of 1960s apartheid South Africa, a brutally segregated and violent place. Apartheid ended in 1990 with the release of Nelson Mandela after 27 years of imprisonment. The first and open free election didn't occur until 1994. Cheryl's novel takes place almost 30 years before that, and it's at the height of apartheid with its institutionalized violence. And the violence is all round, as Maureen discovers. It takes the view of an outsider to react to what everyone else takes for granted. And while Maureen is not at all political, her having been raised in a far more egalitarian society gives us a view of South Africa from the grassroots level, white grassroots level, as it were. At the same time, Maureen knows she has to conform, and we, the readers, see what conformity actually costs her in terms of response and vision. This is not a political novel. It has no other agenda than to tell a story about an ordinary, albeit courageous young woman who arrives in South Africa with her baby and eventually sets up home there and marries Pete, who's also a regular but very kind man. It's an ordinary life set within extraordinary circumstances and extraordinary surroundings. So when Maureen goes to the film hire shop, for example, to hire Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which of course has been banned in South Africa because of its racial content, the proprietor hands her a container with Bambi on the front. This is how people got around censorship in places like repressive societies like South Africa. This is the 60s, so no videos. These are real films that require a projector. So when you hire the film, you can also hire the projector. Maureen decides that she's going to hold regular film nights. And at the first one, which fortunately did not feature Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, someone informs on her. We find out later who it is, and the police arrive. Ordinary life in apartheid South Africa. We are constantly reminded through this novel how different things were not simply in South Africa, but here too in the 60s, most particularly for women. Maureen and Pete have 3 more boys, Liam, Gerard and Clement, and finally a little girl, Lily. When Maureen wants to have her tubes tied, she can't give permission. Her husband is the one who has to give the permission and sign the papers. And there were several times during this novel that I was reminded, as someone who was alive in the 60s, I was reminded at how very, very different things were not so long ago in our society too for women. There is a thread throughout this novel focusing on Maureen's friend Joey, married to the violent Des. Joey is the timeless, battered wife with a young son, Colin, to protect. Africa's Eden is dedicated to Joey and Colin, which I found really very, very moving. There's much more I could say about this story, but far, far better that you read it for yourself. But first, congratulations, Cheryl, on your novel, Africa's Eden. May its journey into the world be long and illustrious. Africa's Eden is now officially launched. Congratulations.
Thank you, Andrea. That was lovely. Thanks so much. And so over to you now, Cheryl.
Okay. I don't know where to start now. I just think that was such a wonderful introduction by Andrea. I would like to say that this book, Africa's Eden, is different to I've written it differently to my first two books because it is more fact than fiction. And I lived in South Africa for 13 years. So it is my experience of Africa. And at a time that, for me, was very confusing. And I've written about a lot of different events that occurred during my life there. There were a lot I had to leave out, but it was a confusing time, and one that I had to learn, I suppose, learn a lot about myself as well as live my life, because South Africa was busy. I mean, there was always something going on. You didn't get much time to reflect on yourself. You worked, even, okay, I had servants in the house, but that meant there were other people I had to be concerned about as well. So things went on within the life of the people who worked for me, and I was then responsible for those people. And there was always a clash of race and trying to understand another race that I was totally ignorant of. And I've tried to write this book from a whole lot of different cultures. In fact, I think I bring in how everybody reacted towards apartheid. The blacks, whites, Indian, coloureds, which probably had one of the worst times, and the poor whites, whom got completely disregarded historically and were only, everybody was one step above the other, so to speak, and which made it very difficult to negotiate, because I didn't know where I was from day to day. But the book is, although it is based on fact, the South African version, it is also incorporates Eden, my hometown, which is in the first two novels, and the characters from that town. And that gives the book a lot of brevity, I think, because Eden, a small town back in the 60s, in rural Australia, was very different to apartheid. And so I made it as I think, like, to show the difference between two countries. And the Eden is a sort of fictionalized version of events. And I think it worked. I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed writing about Eden and bringing that whole, marrying this one particular book with the other two to make it into the trilogy. And I think I pulled that off okay. I'm hoping you'll all read it and turn around and say, yeah, you did. I could read you, and I will actually, an extract from this book, which was about a maid I had employed, and without realising that within that structure there were different tribes and they had to get on with each other. So I really should have consulted other people, like the gardener, for instance, who worked for me. And instead I didn't. I just went ahead and employed somebody. So I will read you this little piece about a Zulu girl I employed, and without asking the other two who worked for me. And she didn't speak English or Afrikaans. She only spoke Zulu. I didn't speak Zulu or Afrikaans. I only spoke English. So everything was sort of in sign language. I will now read an extract from the book. A young, well-built Zulu girl knocked on Maureen's door. "Gelly," she said, tapping her heart. Then, with a lot of hand signals to make up for her lack of English and Afrikaans, she indicated she wanted to look after the children. Thinking she'd been sent by Dorcas, Maureen called Henry, who appeared with his soccer ball tucked under his arm. Gelly grabbed it from him, beckoning Henry and Maureen to come outside. She dribbled the ball with great dexterity, weaving between them. She kicked the ball at an overturned bucket, clapped her hands and laughed. Henry picked up the ball and threw it to Maureen. The next minute, Maureen was flat on her back in the dirt. Gelly held up the ball in triumph. Then, seeing her winded madam on the ground and realising what she had done, threw it to Henry. Moaning apologies in Zulu, Gelly helped Maureen off the ground and brushed the dirt off her with a vigorous hand. She stared at Maureen, round-eyed and anxious. To placate the girl, Maureen motioned her inside and gathered the children. She would try the eager applicant out. Dorcas was furious. "She is a Durban girl, Zulu, not from here, madam. You should not employ her. You can't understand her, and she doesn't understand you. She's 15. Stupid." Maureen wasn't sure if she meant Gelly was stupid or herself. She had an urge to giggle at the look of indignation on Dorcas's face. "I'll give her a try, Dorcas. If she isn't any good, I'll let her go." Dorcas lifted her chin. "I will not help you, madam. You must show her what to do." If Joey had heard this African girl speaking to her like that, she would have gone bananas. The norm was that blacks were supposed to show reverence. All her friends had told her she was hopeless with maids. Training Gelly without the help of Dorcas was difficult. She used sign language and gave practical demonstrations, showing her how to bath the children and watch them in the garden or in the pool. She didn't care that Gelly got in the pool with them. Nor did she mention allowing her in the pool to her friends. They would have forbidden their own children from swimming in the pool with a black person. Maureen decided to extend Gelly's knowledge and train her for house duties, in case Dorcas got sick or left for some reason. She'd start by showing her how to serve at a dinner party she was hosting one next week. Maureen set up the dining room table for make-believe guests and put out serving dishes on the kitchen bench. She stood in the kitchen with the bell and with an attentive Gelly by her side. "When I ring the bell," Maureen lifted the bell and dinged it, pointed to Gelly, "you bring in the food." To demonstrate, Maureen picked up a serving dish, signalled the girl to follow her and carried it into the dining room, placing it on the sideboard. She looked at Gelly and raised her eyebrows. A big smile and intelligent eyes said she understood. Maureen handed her the dish and sent her to the kitchen, then sat at the table and dinged the bell. Giggling, Gelly came in with the dish and put it on the sideboard. Maureen clapped. "Now you must be clean, wear good clothes." Maureen pretended to wash under her arms and put on a dress. Then, smoothing her hands down the front, she twirled in front of a pretend mirror, gave herself a nod of approval. She received a round of applause. And then Gelly pretended to put on a dress and sauntered past Maureen. Maureen gave her a clap. She showed her the kitchen clock, changed the hands to 7 and tapped the glass. Gellie nodded. Maureen held up her hand and counted 5 fingers. Sunday. It was Dorcas's weekend off, so there wouldn't be any problems. The girl's face lit up. Sunday, she repeated, beaming at Maureen. Her enthusiasm made Maureen smile. May her critics suffer heartburn, she thought. The guests were all seated at the table. Maureen had the serving bowls with curry and rice in the oven, chapatis and side dishes on the table. She dinged the silver bell. Gellie was a buxom girl. She waltzed in with a casserole dish full of curry, dressed in her best. Every eye widened, every mouth loosened. On her head was a Zulu headdress made of coloured beads in geometrical designs. Around her neck hung a beaded breastplate that reached down to her large bare breasts with matching bracelets on her arms. Her bead skirt didn't cover her abundant bum. Bands of coloured beads ringed her ankles. She was barefoot. Maureen was bowled over by her beauty. There was total silence at the table. And then a guest whistled in appreciation. Maureen stood up. This is Gellie, everybody. She's a Zulu. Around the table, white hands waved, and in unison, everyone greeted her. She had broken all protocols, making Maureen's dinner party a raging success. Pete laughed himself onto the floor after guests had left. You can really pick 'em. What a shame your mother missed this. She would have loved it. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. It was a fascinating night, I might say, and yeah, it was unfortunately there were other things that occurred as a result of that night, and which I'll leave as a mystery so that you'll read it. But the book is, it's about a lot of events that occurred and usually involved the maid or the gardener that worked for Maureen. It also involved the politics perhaps of the day, but not in depth, not a political book at all. It really is just how a young ignorant woman negotiated her way through a new marriage and a new country that had was an incredible injustice towards another culture, which she found so hard to accept, because she had never been open to anything like this in her life, and it was stunning for her, as in it left her with a lot of guilt, which I guess will always be the case, because living in apartheid South Africa, when in Rome, you just couldn't buck the system, or an average person or in a family like that really didn't do anything. Also, there was no there was censorship to the point where you didn't know what was going on in the country. You know, where there was uprisings, for instance, it was never in the newspaper. So you just went from day to day thinking everything was fine. It was an extremely interesting time, and I hope you'll find the book an interesting read. If there's any questions.
I would just like to say, I think what's interesting about that story is how you write it and you show how much dignity Gelly has in that scene. So, you know, I think that's a really important aspect of that particular extract. So, yes, does anybody want to ask questions or make comments? Because you can. The only thing you need to do is you should either put your hand up so we've got a chance, or you can put your hand up down on the reactions button if you like, and then we'll be able to see that you've got a hand up.
Hi, I'm not on screen, but I would like to say how much I enjoyed the first two books, and I'm looking forward to reading this one. It sounds quite amazing and quite different from the other two as well. So congratulations, Cheryl. The other two are great reads, and I'm sure this one will be too.
Thanks, Robin. Appreciate that. Lovely to hear from you.
Anyone
All right.
else?
Can I just ask another question then? Cheryl, when did you start writing?
You know, sometimes I think I had only started late in life, but in actual fact, I think I was an artist, and I used a lot of text in my art. Yeah. And if I think about it too, when I left Australia, I used to write in an enormous amount of letters, and my family actually had one put in the local newspaper in Eden back in the 60s. So I guess, you know, along the way I've been writing without knowing I've been writing. And then when I decided I would get serious about it, that was after my husband had a massive stroke, and I needed a diversion from being a carer for him, and writing gave me that place that I could go to and relive and create, that was completely outside being a carer, that nobody else could be a part of but me, and I needed that for myself. So yeah, I don't know how long I've been writing. I think I've been writing for a very long time.
Sounds like it, yeah.
Knowing it.
Sounds like it's been for a long time.
Yes, yes. I have written a couple of articles that got published in art magazines. I wrote an art book back in 2003. It was my exegesis, actually, and it got published in Germany. So, yeah. I just had to learn where to put the full stops properly. So I did a course in TAFE. And thank you to the Spinifex Press, who have very good editors.
Yes.
Thank you. The other question or comment I have is that Eden plays a part in all the stories, and there are so many funny stories, but it's kind of tragi-comedy some of the time, because they're so heart-wrenching, and yet you want to be able to laugh. There's this contradictory feeling that you have each time. Do you know how you manage to do that? Because it's very clever, and you do it over and over and over.
Okay, well, I suppose, you know, there's always, I think I work on truth and fiction. So true events, I pick up on true events and then create a story, create something around them, but that's humorous, I think. So I can, it's a way of lifting, for me, lifting a bad situation into a good situation, or using characters that I knew when I was a kid and developing those characters into the characters I've put through the 3 novels. I mean, I lived next door to an old aunt who built a coffin in a shed, and she didn't she probably had a yearly wash, and she was a miser and buried her money in the garden. So here was a great premise to be able to to develop a character that would lift maybe a difficult situation for another character out of that situation. And so I it was like a balance thing, I think. I think I want to create a book that doesn't leave everybody flat and in the dumps. I really want something that is a bit uplifting, because I think we live in really difficult times now, and the news and everything around us is so negative. And I don't want to create something that's really negative. So Eden was a great place for me to have some funny moments, to have that, and the characters in the town that I knew as a kid too, I used some of those so to build on. Yeah, so I think that's how I did it. I sort of tried to balance.
You're going to have another launch up in Merimbula, I think you said?
Yes,
right?
Collins Bookshop up there has invited me to launch my book up there and do another launch, and Delegate in New South Wales, which is an 1.5-hour drive from Eden. And I thought I'd combine the two and have a couple more book launches in the two little towns. Because Eden is usually everybody who I went to school with turns up there. You know, I don't know if and they're all thrilled because it's about their hometown and their past, and everybody sort of relates to it.
And aren't you lucky you grew up in a town with a name like Eden?
Yes.
No? I mean, what a writer's gift.
It was, because in a way, like, Eden has two connections for me. The Garden of Eden, which is what I worked on with the idea of you all looking for that Shangri-La sort of place to live in your life, which I think we all do. And it never quite works out that way. So, you know, some people might be lucky and it does. But, and Eden, so Eden was a perfect name for me to use the two, which was the plan, really. And if I didn't think at the time, but I thought when I wrote the second book, and that was placed in Sweden, the end, you know, SWEDEN, perfect.
Andrea, do you want to say anything more? You'll have to unmute if you do.
So, okay, I'm now unmuted. No, it's always very interesting to hear what an author has to say, and particularly if they've borrowed from life. And then, of course, as a fiction writer, I'm always very interested to see how the fiction works on top of it. So no, I'm very, very happy to sit and listen. Thank you.
Oh, good. It's a bit of a negotiation, actually, because yes, because, you know, sometimes I don't want to get that attached to the truth in or an event in a story when I am going to turn it into a fictional part. So it's a bit of a juggle. Not to get to.
Can I just say something else? Have you ever? I mean, I'm someone who makes everybody up, so everyone's happy. But have you ever had to defend yourself to people who recognise themselves in one or other of the novels?
No, because I don't. But I think my family in Eden have had to answer to a couple of questions. But I might say that some of the characters I've just created, then they haven't been fictional character. They are completely fictional characters. So it's just a few of them that I've adapted into a fictional character that's sort of come from somebody real. So once again, you know, yeah, I've sort of juggled them around.
I think the very fact that you're going back to Eden and you can go back there safely probably supports what you're saying.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because some of the fiction parts in the book in Eden, like quite a bit of it's fiction, my sister gets tapped on the shoulder and they said, did that happen? Now, I can remember that situation and is that what happened? That's really, you know, oh, yes, I think I remember that. And you think, no, you don't, you know, it wasn't true. But they're now thinking, yeah, that was true. So our long-term memory can sometimes fool us into thinking or believing something occurred when it actually didn't. So history's told us that, hasn't it?
Well, you know, everybody, I mean, it's that old thing about, you know, siblings who are raised in the same family and they have totally different narratives of their childhood. So you know you're in trouble, though, when someone turns around and says to you, not, oh, isn't that interesting? I'd forgotten that. It's when they turn around and say to you, you got it wrong. That's not the story that I remember. Fortunately, that hasn't happened, which is good.
No, the third book, Africa's Eden, is really the most sort of autobiographical, I will say, whereas the first two books were fictional and just based on little truths that I've sort of built on. So I think that's the difference in the three of them. So one is really based on my experience in South Africa. Yeah. The other two not. So although I have travelled in the countries that I've mentioned, I've actually lived in those countries. So I had an understanding then of what life was like, say, with the second book in Sweden, because I lived there for a couple of years. And then I lived in England and worked in England, so I knew the Channel Islands, for instance, so I knew what that culture was like, as well as Africa. So I haven't really dealt with countries that I don't know anything about. And yeah, I think actually I'll have to, it's terrible to say, but I have to thank COVID for the last two books because the isolation, you know, I had time to write them. And after the first book, there were a lot of requests. Oh, you know, what happened to the family? Oh, you know, are you going to write a second book? Oh, you can't leave it there. So that's why I went into creating the second book. And then COVID was still happening. So I thought, okay, I'll have a go at the third one.
So I have to ask, is the trilogy going to turn into a quartet?
I don't think so. Well, no, I don't think so. But I mean, who knows? I'm at that moment, you know, where I've just finished the one and gone, oh, thank God for that. Now it's a case of, I need something to do. Maybe. But I actually have some kids' stories that I started many years ago and never finished, and I might have a go at those. But who knows? Quartet.
Oh, Cheryl, I'm taking over from Susan, and I had to relinquish my office because, you know, we do live in the sticks in the bush, and the other Wi-Fi wasn't working. So I'm going to do the thank yous from Susan's computer. So first of all, Andrea, it was lovely to see you. I don't know how many years since we have not seen you in real life. But anyway, thank you very much for your very perceptive reading of Cheryl's book. And it is very true what you said. I mean, the Maureen, or Cheryl, Maureen, it was a very rather naive woman who was living in South Africa and did her best to make her life and the lives for her children, her husband, bearable. And I agree with you that it's not a political book per se, but it is still quite political because it is actually somebody who comes from a total different perspective, has no clue about probably what apartheid is, and then learns all these stories as the one that Cheryl read about the girl that Maureen employed, and also has to bear the consequences. So there are a few instances in the book where things could have gone badly wrong for Maureen and Pete. So you have to read it all yourself. I guess Pauline Hopkins, I'm not sure if Pauline is here, and me were the lucky ones who first got the manuscript sent by Cheryl. And we'd always, any new manuscript from Cheryl, you want to read it immediately. But, you shouldn't really, because you've got all these other things to do. But I think Cheryl has a fantastic quality of making books that actually want to really turn the page to get to the next page. And in fact, Robin Rowland, who I'm sure you all know, just sent us a message recently and said, I bought the trilogy and I just can't put the first book down. I have to keep reading. So I hope she keeps reading and then write a very nice review. Now, after Pauline and I got the first draft of Cheryl's book, we were quite happy with it. I mean, I have to say, Cheryl, it's not the full stops, it's the commas. But since commas are in the eye of the beholder, who says that there should be a comma? I mean, I just read the sentence, I think, okay, comma here. And then Pauline says, no, the rules say blah, blah. And then Pauline wins. So it has been a total pleasure editing your books. My favorite bits, of course, are the invented ones from Eden. And you just have a really wicked streak in bringing so much fun to what you write. And I mean, poor old Eric is just such a awful, fantastic, wonderful, bad character. And Lillian is really a heroine. She's just a heroine and stays a heroine actually through the 3 books. Now, those of you who don't know about this fantastic book we published last year, which is called Not Dead Yet, and we are all not dead yet. Lucky for us. Cheryl has a most wonderful story in it that really brings smiles to your eyes, because Cheryl writes about, and I think that's a true story, isn't it? When you went walking in North England, I think it was, with a friend, and you were the 2 oldest women, and the the leader of the group was a stupid young male, as they are, kept looking at you saying, oh, those 2 old biddies, how long are you going to last? And not only did you outlast him, you had actually great fun along the way, although it was a very, very difficult walk. And so, fantastic that you do these things. And then also we have another treat in store later in the year. There's a book which was going to be called Alive, but it's now actually called It's All Connected, which is edited by Pauline Hopkins. And Cheryl has a story in that too. And again, your humor shines through. You have a really fantastic knack for all the humor. So anyway, Paul and I were reading your book, then Susan read it, and then we put the commas in, and then we got down to a few serious questions. Oh, can you say that? Was that really like that under apartheid and so on? It was a pure joy to edit your book. I wish there were more books like that. But I do actually think the trilogy is probably as far as we should get. So now a book would never just exist between the author, although the author, of course, is the main person, and the editor, which are also terribly important, I may say, Pauline and me, and Susan a bit. Yeah, well, just a bit. But there are many other people involved. And so I want to thank Deb Snipson for her absolutely beautiful cover. And the photo is, of course, also from a woman who also plays a part in Africa's Eden, who still exists today, still lives today. And we had great trouble getting a high-res image of that wonderful, wonderful house with the beautiful jacaranda tree. And if you look at the 3 covers with all that beautiful bar at the top, which is just fantastic, which somebody who's listening now doesn't like bars, but we all do. We love bars. And it has, all of the 3 books have something to do with the window, or at least the fence, or at least the house. Or at least the house. So it's a great, I mean, making covers is the best thing about publishing, honestly. And we've just had a whole spate of new covers, which made us all very happy. The authors maybe not so much, but Susan and me very much. So we're very, very happy with these 3 covers. Then if you, of course, have to buy the book and look inside the book, and Helen Christie, who has been our typesetter for years and years and years, has done another very beautiful layout. She actually left a little shell inside, and I said, Helen, this is not a book about the sea. You need something else. And we want actually a jacaranda flower. Well, didn't get to be a jacaranda flower, but it's a hibiscus, which is, as close as you get. And it's very pretty. So that's Helen. So thank you, those 2 wonderful ones. Then, of course, what would we do if we didn't have Rachel McDermott and Caitlin, who are responsible for distributing our books and talking about our books on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all those things where you need to talk about it and make a lot of noise about it. So that's what they're doing, Goodreads, etc. And please, if you read the book, write a review for whether it's Amazon or Goodreads. We need reviews because unfortunately these days that's what makes people take notice. If you have lots of reviews, that's a wonderful book, best ever, then that's a very good thing. Now, lastly, and never to be forgotten, I want to thank Marilyn Damiano and Sharon Murphy, who Marilyn is our office manager and has been with us for 26 years and knows more about Spinifex than I think anybody, including Susan and me. And anytime you get a book sent from Spinifex, and I said, oh, a wonderful book from Spinifex. It's actually Sharon and Marilyn who put it together in the warehouse and sent it to you. So a big thank you to those 2. So I think this is probably all we need to say. Any more comments, questions? I mean, we're really, really happy to publish Cheryl's books. There's 3 of them, the trilogy. We're also very, very happy that everybody who was here, I'm just reading some of the things on the site. So thank you very, very much for your comments. All I can say is look at how beautiful it looks. Africa's Eden in 3 different formats: iPad, phone, normal book, ordinary book, boring, ordinary book, not just an ebook. So get it, read it. Free post. Oh, it says free post in Australia, I'm being reminded. And of course, you can also order it in America from IPG Books and in the UK from Gazelle. As for Europe, it's really tough since Brexit. All the books take forever. So any Europeans listening, order it directly from Spinifex. You will get it. At least you will get it. It'll take some time, but you will get it. So make sure that you know that you can buy the trilogy for a reduced price. And all I can say is happy reading, especially maybe over Easter, if you don't know. Except if you read it over Easter, you won't actually go and get all the Easter egg chase done, because you'll be inside reading this book. It's a really, really good read. So again, thank you to everybody, Andrea, Susan, Rachel, and Pauline. I'm not sure if she's here. And we all love you, Cheryl. We all really love your books. And we'll raise our glass, well, if we had something in it, to you. We will actually do that after that. Yeah, well, we're all running in empty, isn't it? Typical. You know, we just talk and talk instead of drink and drink. Maybe Andrea still has something in her glass that I can't see. So we'll finish that afterwards. And
congratulations, Cheryl.
Cheryl, to another book. Well done.
Well done, yeah.
And do remember, Cheryl keeps saying it's my life. It's not true. It's fiction. You need to remember it's fiction. Fiction.
It's fiction, definitely.
It is fiction. Especially the horrible Eric bits. It's all fiction.
It is.
Okay.
Rachel, can you put up the 3-book slide, please?
That's what concentrating looks like. Well, yes, good. That's a compliment.
There's the book. There's Cheryl.
Yeah.
Then we have the trilogy.
Yes. Yeah,
so there's all the books.
And the covers. Covers.
And here we have the special offer. So if you click through just on the website, you'll find it. So there's the Eden trilogy.
And it's beautifully done. And I have to really say, this is Rachel doing these beautiful images. And so website. Thank you. And website and everything. So, I mean, big thank you to Rachel.
Yeah, sorry, Rachel. I thought there had been a 3rd slide with all of that.
I know, you tricked me.
Sorry, I didn't
keep me on this on my toes. But
it looks really beautiful.
Looks great.
So maybe we should just again drink to Cheryl, or rather go and drink to Cheryl, and have a lovely evening. Don't put on the news to spoil all of this, and maybe watch something nice like Bluey. Watch Bluey.
And congratulations once again, and thank you to Andrea for launching the book.